Today on Locked On Canadiens, can the Habs play spoiler to the New York Islanders?
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 1048 of your first listen of the day. As you know, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Terms and conditions apply. My name is Laura Sab, also known as the Active Stick. I'm not joined today by the wonderful Scott Matla, and I'm also a little bit under the weather, hence the lateness of this episode. So I do hope you bear with me. It'll probably be a little bit quicker of an episode than we're used to. So let's get right down to business. The Canadiens and New York Islanders are going to be playing a game tonight. And as we talked about in our last episode, the Canadiens are kind of in this position now where they could play spoiler to a lot of teams because the teams that they're still playing in the games that they have remaining are all still in the playoff hunt. They have not yet been eliminated, but it's close. Currently, the New York Islanders, so I'm recording this very early on Thursday morning. The New York Islanders do sit in a playoff spot, in the wild card spot. In a playoff spot. But they are closely followed by the Penguins. And I'm just going to go pull up the wild card. I literally sat there and studied this for 5 minutes before I started recording, and I could not remember for the life of me. So in the Metropolitan Division, the New York Islanders sit in the third quote-unquote playoff spot, like the non-wild card spot. They've got 87 points, and they have played 78 games. So they've still got 4 games left. Also having 4 games left are the Washington Capitals on their heels with 85 points. And then the Pittsburgh Penguins, also with 4 games remaining, have 84 points. The Red Wings also have 84 points. So the Philadelphia Flyers have not mathematically been eliminated, but they do have one less game to play, and they're sitting at 83 points. So this is going to be a bit, I think the Canadiens basically took care of the Flyers' playoff chances. There's another game that's going to be extremely significant for this, and that's the game that Pittsburgh and Detroit are playing against each other. But in terms of the Montreal Canadiens, the Islanders want to do everything they possibly can to clinch that playoff spot or to improve their position or improve their chances. And these teams head to head, the Canadiens have won both games so far. They had a pretty decent record. However, the last game was Patrick Roy's, I think it was his 3rd game coaching the Islanders. It had been it was about 5 days after he was hired. And there was also the fallout that was when Brendan Gallagher did this egregious, I don't know why, check to the head to Adam Pelech. So that game, I don't know if necessarily the Islanders are going to be all that interested in retribution right now, given that they're so focused on trying to make the playoffs. And one thing that they have been able to do under Patrick Roy is really, really tighten up their defense. So with the Habs sort of still having that top line being one of the only ones that can produce, it will be a little bit difficult for them. And, as we talked about before, you can root for the Canadiens to lose the next few games just to increase their chances of winning the draft lottery. But that's not how this team is wired. That's not how this coach is wired. They're going to be trying to win the game. Something that is of note, like I said, Patrick Roy has been able to give the Islanders a lot more of a tight defense since he's taken over. And, in the last few years, we've watched the Islanders be quite a defensive team. We've watched the Islanders be really tough to play against. They basically grind out wins, and they exhaust their opponents. That's essentially how they play. It doesn't really matter who's been coaching them. They're essentially just a really annoying team to play against. Their special teams, however, under Patrick Roy have not been great. And as we noted, particularly in the case of the penalty kill, Montreal's has improved quite a bit. The power play is still It's not as hopeless as it used to be. And the thing about the penalty kill that for me is like really upsetting is that it was so bad for much of the season that the fact that they've been able to improve so much over the month of March and like I would say starting late in February, they've improved so much. I believe they are now sitting if you only take that into consideration, not their entire year, they are now sitting at fourth in the NHL, but their overall season stats are not that great. I believe they're ranked 23rd in the NHL as we are going into this game. But I have a little bit more faith in the way that the Canadians are playing on that penalty kill. I also am not sure what to make of the the difference now with so many players out of the lineup with I just it feels like it feels really hard to get a handle on what to expect from the Canadians when you've got all these injuries or all these other players coming back in. So for me, from my perspective, what I do want to see is a game that does not fall out of hand, especially in terms of like you want to see them play physically, but you don't want to see unnecessary fights. I know Brendan Gallagher would be a target. I know, the Islanders, if they care enough about their playoff lives, like they won't let it get too out of hand. But just from my perspective, we're doing the same thing. We're praying they don't get paid. We're praying they don't get hurt. Please nobody get hurt. Please nobody get hurt. So I think for me, sorry about that. Not sure what happened from a tech perspective, but I'm back. I said I think for me, like my biggest thing is I don't want there to be injuries. I want there to be tight play. The Canadians just I don't want to say surviving this game. I want to see those players, particularly somebody like Nick Suzuki or Yuri Slafkovsky, increase their point totals, goal totals, improve their season totals, just kind of end the season on a high note. The one thing I will say is that the Islanders' penalty kill is the worst in the league, and I believe by a large margin. So I am hoping for some kind of power play goal just to kind of boost um, the team a little bit. And I did want to mention before moving on to another topic is that the Islanders right now are really riding a hot streak. They are truly on fire and in a way that we haven't seen since the beginning of the season. They have had an up and down season, floundering, coach change, all of that kind of stuff, but they're playing incredibly well right now. And so the Canadians do kind of have to watch out for that. If they lose the game, I won't be too disappointed. I would love to see a fun, entertaining game. Maybe not as crazy as the one against the Flyers the other night, but you know what? Why not? But all I want from the rest of the season, it's not even, we were talking about playing spoiler. Who do we want to make? Who do we want to see make the playoffs? All of that. For me, I'm just like, no more players get hurt. No more players get hurt. And please, please, please survive this game against the Islanders. But I think we're in for a game that's a little bit more trappy, a little bit more grindy, but we'll see. In the meantime, I do want to move on to something that was a discussion that we were having based on an RDS, I guess, list. And we'll get into that in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Factor Meals. Let me tell you a little bit about my life. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm very, very busy all the time. It's a little bit crazy, as you'll know. Sometimes I miss the recordings and Scott has to take care of them. But here's the thing, like one thing that I do have problems with is meal times, planning meals, cooking, preparing, and cleaning. And I don't have to do that anymore because now there's Factor's delicious, ready to eat meals. You can get chef prepared meals on the table in just 2 minutes with Factor's ready to eat, so you can get back to doing what you love this spring. For me, it's doing this podcast. Are you looking for gourmet meals? You can try meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, truffle butter, broccolini, and asparagus. Or you can have your basic regular, you don't have to go too fancy, but everything is no fuss and no mess because they eliminate the hassle of prepping, cooking, cleaning up. You're not going to waste any ingredients and you can tailor it to your own schedule. There's stuff like, there's calorie smart, there's vegan, vegetarian, protein plus, anything. For me, I'm really big on the protein to keep me, to keep my energy up all day. In fact, there's going to be your solution for fast premium meals without the need for cooking. And at this busy season, I'm sure you're heading into the home stretch of either the school year, like maybe your work's picking up right now. Factor meal is the time for it. And we are celebrating Earth Day all month long in April. You can look out for the Earth Month Eats badge on the menu for the lowest carbon footprint meals. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 and use code LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. That is code LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. All right, let's get into. So this was actually a couple of nights ago. I believe it was going on during the game, and RDS put up this banner of their list of their best players over the last couple of decades. So let me just pull it up. Oh, it's not the decade; it is 15 years. So it is a roster made out of the le meilleur du tricolore depuis 15 ans. So in goal, they have Carey Price and Yaroslav Halak. I don't think we can argue too much with that. That's pretty much the best we've seen in the last 15 years. And then on defense, they have Andrei Markov, PK Subban. They've made that a pairing. Then they have Roman Hammerlake and Shea Weber. Mike Matheson and Jeff Petrie. I know a lot of you will have some thoughts about that. And then their seventh D was Josh Georges. Max Pacioretty, Nick Suzuki, and Alex Kovalev is their first line. Alexander Radulov, Thomas Buchanan, and Cole Caulfield as your second line. Mike Camilleri, Saku Koivu, Brian Jonta as your third line. And then your fourth line is David Desharnais, Philippe Danault, Brendan Gallagher, and Thomas Tatar. So my first problem with this list, I'm going to launch into a rant, is the Tyler Toffoli erasure. I understand that, Thomas Tatar did really well here. It was a good change of scenery for him. And when he was gone, it was like a huge absence was felt, right? Like it didn't just have to do with Tatar, Danault being gone, all of that, the loss of Buchanan. I do think that it's quite telling that in the last 15 years, the person who is considered the first line center today is still the first line center considered over the course of the last 15 years. Like that is definitely something where, if you're arguing, is Nick Suzuki a superstar? Is he elite? Blah, blah, blah. There's nobody else that played center on this team in the last 15 years that could possibly um, grab that spot, right? Like that top line spot. Like to me, that makes the most sense. What I think is interesting is Alexander Radulov wasn't here for a long time, but he's still there on that list. I would maybe have moved. I don't know. Maybe it's longevity bias because Camilleri was here for a bit longer, but I would maybe have moved Camilleri up there. But like my biggest thing is like, where is Tyler Toffoli on this lineup? I don't know that. I don't know that who I would remove in favor of him, but I still feel that that's a glaring omission. And then another thing is Roman Hammerlick. Like for me, that's a little tough because obviously he was a first overall pick by Tampa. Like it's not like, he's a very talented, or he was a very, very talented player and he brought a lot. But by the time he was in Montreal, he was kind of on the down or declining part of his career. So why are we picking him? Like it just goes to show kind of the dearth of true talent in their prime the Canadians have had over the last 15 years. And to that end, like who are the true talents that they've had in their prime? Andrei Markov, absolutely. PK Subban, like that he was in his prime here before he got traded. Max Pacioretty, he had some of his best years here. Guys like that, where like you look at that, and then Carey Price obviously at that time was also doing amazing. So like those guys, like I do feel like the sting of like having watched their primes get wasted if they had been surrounded by better supporting players, if they'd done a lot to kind of go for it, that would have been great. And also at that time, Brendan Gallagher was not an albatross contract. He was truly useful to this team. It kind of makes me laugh, the idea of Nick Suzuki playing with Alexei Kovalev. I just feel like that dynamic would be very entertaining and funny. I also think that a lot of you will have arguments against Mike Matheson being included, but once again, I ask, who would you replace him with? Like, who was better, right? Like, it's the same thing with Hammer. Like, it's like, who was better in the last 15 years? I will say one thing though. With respect to, it doesn't look like they've included a lot of the younger players. Like you're not seeing here Yuri Slavkovsky. Like where would he be, right? You're not seeing here Arturi Lehkonen. That is a big thing. You're not seeing here, maybe they're just not including, the most recent players. You're not seeing here Caden Gooley either. Like I do think that he's worth putting in this conversation. Like the team that we're looking at here is a bunch of guys that were much loved, but not necessarily elite talent, right? Like, you're looking at somebody like Brian Jonta, for example. He was a popular player here, and he had a tough assignment following Saku Koivu. Like it it a lot of like the situation wasn't great, but he was still able to become a fan favorite here, and we really appreciate it. Mike Camilleri, the way it ended was not great, but the fans absolutely loved him, right? Like there's a lot of players like that where, David Desharnais, like he was not the most talented player. Like we were always asking ourselves, why is that guy on the first line? Why is that guy on the first line? The answer was always that there was no one better to put there. But he gave the Canadians his all. Like people admired his effort. People admired him for his perseverance for very, very many reasons, right? And then you're looking at, like, for me, like your fourth line center is Philippe Danault on this team. That would be incredible. Imagine being on a team where you have such depth at center that Philippe Danault is your fourth line center. Like that's incredible. But that being said, like I look at this team and I'm like, you've got three extremely extremely useful, extremely effective. Effective is the word. Two-way centers in Saku Koivu, Philippe Danault, and Thomas Plekanec. And Thomas Plekanec, honestly, like I feel like he was well rated by Habs fans, but he was underrated throughout the league. And I'm starting to think too with Nick Suzuki that he's going to remain underrated throughout the league. But it's just like you could see this and you're looking at this and you're like, okay, there's nobody here that you would compare to those Stanley Cup winning team center depths, right? That to me is the big glaring thing. Like, yeah, with the defense you can have, you've got like a little bit more of an even spread of talent, I'm going to call it. It sounds weird, but that's what I'm going to call it, right? Whereas like with the center depth, you've got even talent, and then you've got one guy who's like better than them, but like you have nobody there like that you would consider like an absolute superstar. I'm not saying they have to be Austin Matthews level, but you're looking at that and you're looking at, like, let's say Stamkos in his prime, or you're looking at just like anybody who's played on Tampa. Even McKinnon, like I think, guys like that, like there's nobody that would be mentioned in the same conversation as that. So that to me like was another glaring thing. But either way, I just wanted to talk about it because for me the Tyler Toffoli omission was egregious. And then it just like, it just felt a little bit like remember some guys. Oh, Josh Georges was another one that I wanted to mention, that I was like, I felt like he was fine, but like the fans absolutely adored him, and it was because he put himself in positions where he could play physically and he could block shots. And I like it just, like for me, like a seventh D, like Josh Georges is your seventh D in his prime. That's fine. Like I don't want to argue with that, but it just feels like he's one of those players where the love of the fans kind of elevated his status on this list. Anyway, so all of this to say, that was my opinion on that all star team from the Habs last 15 years. And then we're going to turn our attention now to another team in the NHL and talk about some, I don't even know if there's shenanigans at this point. I think it's just kind of a sad, sad situation for everyone involved. And that's coming up in just one moment. But first, let's talk about Indeed, our other sponsor for this episode. Because when you're trying to draft your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could handpick the best stars for your business team? If you're building your talent roster, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like matching, assessments, and virtual interviews. Hey, waiting? Indeed's US data shows over 50% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume in Indeed matches their job description the moment that they sponsor a job. So hiring is hard, and I can tell you that hiring is hard. Trying to find the right person for your role, it's so sensitive and there's a lot riding on it. And Indeed will help with Instant Match because the candidates you invite to apply through Instant Match are 3 times more likely to apply to your job than candidates who are only seeing it in a search. With Indeed matching as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates whose resumes really do match your job description. It really speeds up your hiring and it makes everything so much easier. Indeed knows that when you're growing your business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/locked-on to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, so we were kind of joking a lot about this ownership group from Salt Lake City, asking, local fans for suggestions on their NHL team. And then a lot has happened in a very short amount of time. First, there was a story about an auction for land, and the arena was going to be built there. And then there were water issues, groundwater issues, and then the city was like, "What are you doing? This is not," or the city didn't really support it. And then yesterday, we suddenly heard, and again, so there was a lot of smoke, but we heard that there was actually um, a deal being worked on, not a deal in place, a deal being worked on, and significant and meaningful progress has been made for the franchise to be rebranded and moved to Salt Lake City for literally next season. So there's a lot going on right now, and Robin Leanio of Locked On Arizona Coyotes did a great job on her show, did a live show. You can go and watch that now on Locked On Arizona Coyotes. It was very emotional. I really truly feel for Coyotes fans. So what the NHL has done right now is that they've pushed back on the idea that this deal is done. What they are kind of indicating, though, is that they have 2 schedules right now for next year. They've got an NHL schedule that includes a franchise being in Arizona, Phoenix specifically, and then they've got another one that includes the franchise being in Salt Lake. I personally, I have to admit that I'm very curious as to how it would go in Utah. I It's not the first place I would have thought to put an NHL team, but it is close enough. Like, I know I have friends who used to live in Salt Lake that would go to Coyotes games or Vegas Golden Knights games. Like, I feel like that regional rivalry could still be maintained. They don't have an NHL ready arena is the issue. Like, they do have a basketball arena. But for the NHL configuration, it looks like they only would be able to seat about 14,000 people. And it's not necessarily set up. I mean, we saw what happened when the Islanders went to Barclays Center and did not work out great. But they ended up with a nice arena of their own and went back. So I don't know. I don't necessarily know what the plan is concrete for an NHL arena to be built, but it looks like there's a very strong chance the Coyotes could be sold and could move to Utah. And like for me, I have to be honest with you. I feel like this dragged on way too long. Like when they started having attendance and ownership issues, the plug should have been pulled. And I think the NHL was very stubborn in that respect. I don't know if anyone remembers the name Jim Balsillie of the BlackBerry. I don't know if anyone has seen a BlackBerry in the last decade or so, but he kept trying to buy the team and move them to Hamilton, Ontario, and he rubbed everyone the wrong way is the way that I'm going to put it. And I don't know if that made the NHL dig their heels in more if they're committed, because I do think that hockey works in non-traditional markets, but it's very important to have the right ownership group, the right arena, local support. Like when I mean like local government, like municipal government support, and you have to make the games accessible to everybody. You have to make the team good, and expansion franchises and relocated franchises aren't always good in terms of their chances, the standings, the quality of the hockey, and all of that. So you're always being challenged by those. You have to make the game experience so great that the mediocre hockey doesn't deter people from going. And so, whatever happens in Salt Lake, like the arena has to be easy to get to, and you're also kind of it is a dry state, so there's a lot of financial considerations as well, like things you would ordinarily sell at hockey games that you might not be selling in Salt Lake, that you really have to worry about and you really have to plan for. And so like whatever happens, like I just feel bad for Coyotes fans. Like they have been treated awfully. They've just been pulled in all directions. Like they've been taken on an emotional roller coaster for as long as I can remember. We just talked about, the Habs of the last 15 years. Like I don't know if it's been only 15 years that Coyotes fans have had to deal with this. Like it feels like much longer than that. So all this to say that whatever happens, like if there's a new NHL team in Salt Lake, I'm going to be very curious and excited to see what that's like. But if not, like I really hope that the city of Arizona or the city of Phoenix and the ownership group in Arizona get it together, get their heads out of their butts and make something happen. And that's it for today. We will be back with a recap of the game against the Islanders tonight. Do not forget that tomorrow's a mailbag episode, so we want all of your mailbag questions. You can send them to us comments and write MBQ. There are some mailbag questions we didn't get to last week that we will be covering today. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Canadians. You can send us questions there as well. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening. We will both be back tomorrow.